Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Behind Headlines. And in this programme today, we will be discussing Israel at war as Hamas declared war on Israel by invading Israel on Saturday, the 7th of October, with over 1,500 Hamas terrorists who killed innocent Israeli civilians, what can only be described as Israel's 9/11 moment or Israel's Pearl Harbor. This was the greatest terrorist attack, massacre and war crimes committed on Israeli territory since the establishment of the modern state of Israel over 75 years ago. And we'll be unpacking how Israel responds now that she's at war. Regan, I don't know about you, and I know we feel very much the same, but my heart is breaking for what has happened to Israel. This terrorist attack that we are beginning to know more and more about that occurred on Saturday morning, that's taken the lives of probably over 1,000 Israelis, and those that have been over maybe 150 have actually been kidnapped by Hamas and taken to Gaza. We know that Israel is at war. We know the situation in the north is fragile, and Israel as a nation is reeling under what is considered the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history. And maybe the world is now waking up to understand who Hamas are and their intent to destroy the nation of Israel.
You're exactly right, Simon. Both of us have friends and family who are deeply affected by this immense tragedy. The shameful gravity of it cannot be overstated. This attack occurred on Sabbath. It occurred not just on the average Sabbath, it occurred on Simchat Torah, which concludes the Sukkot festival. It's meant to be a day of celebration of God's giving the law, of God's covenant really with his people Israel, a day that is usually marked in addition to the rest in synagogue services with much joy, dance and laughter and feasting. It is a day that, however, will be fully marred and remembered by Israel as a nation as its darkest day since its modern founding.
And it's interesting to see what the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, has said. He's described this as the biggest massacre against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And I think it just brings this into kind of magnitude. And Regan, having visited those communities in southern Israel, I went in about 2001 and stayed on one of those kibbutzes for the night just next to Gaza that has been attacked and destroyed. Amazingly beautiful kibbutzes. And last year, as part of the Christian Media Summit, we were taken to Kibbutz Narim, which is only 7 miles away from the Gaza Strip. And we met the community leaders there in their beautiful homes and their beautiful gardens. And they described how living there 90% of the time is paradise, but that 10% when the rockets and missiles come over, it's like hell. But it literally, after the weekend, it seems like the gates of hell have literally been unleashed on these Jewish communities. And I remember they were thanking us for showing solidarity with them, for actually coming to visit them as we sat down and had a fantastic meal with them last December. And I said, no, you shouldn't be thanking us, we should be thanking you, because what you and your communities are doing is protecting the state of Israel. You are there on the front lines as a barrier between yourselves and evil on the other side of the border in Gaza. And now, and also you are defending the West from this dangerous, extremist ideology that's a death cult that would destroy the Western world and conquer the world for political Islam. And Islamic extremism in its most extreme form is represented by Hamas. And sadly, many of those leaders that spoke to us wouldn't be alive today. They've either been taken captive by Hamas and taken to Gaza, or they were shot dead in their homes. Just having a look at the rave scene, the rave party that took place close to the Gaza Strip, and those young people running, fearing for their lives. cars completely burnt out, children murdered. I mean, what we're seeing is a massacre, a pogrom, and all my years of studying Israel, visiting Israel, reporting on Israel, I've never seen anything to the extent that we've seen over the weekend.
There you have some images from the scene of what was meant to be a peace festival. It was meant to be a festival that was promoting an idea of unity. Absolute horror, as it turned out. As dawn came, there were individuals, terrorists, who paraglided into the grounds. Others waited outside the emergency exits and picked off those who were there one by one. The stories you will have seen, you will have read, you will have probably wept and been horrified as we were. A lot of the news that came out, still so many missing. The bodies of some paraded mercilessly, desecrated in the streets of Gaza with civilians, Gazan civilians. I want to emphasize that. Gazan civilians chanting Allahu Akbar in support of their terrorist heroes. We cannot be in any way talking about both sides or equivocating on this. Gaza is in its situation as it stands because it chooses to be. It is fully responsible for these grave acts of terror, these heinous and evil actions which saw children killed, parents killed, grandparents killed, dementia sufferers mocked and ridiculed and killed, people in hospitals and care homes massacred as well. And as you've already mentioned, Simon, the people in the kibbutzim there to essentially be a safeguard for the rest of the nation, there to be the first stop between the nation and the Gaza Strip, invaded, infiltrated, and massacred. And it's been reassuring to see so many of our national leaders be united in speaking up against this heinous evil. The question, though, is how long? Golda Meir once said that the rest of the world hated when Jews acted with strength, but they were supportive of the Jews when they were weak and when they seemed fragile. So we've had a moment of fragility. Hamas is now, God willing, about to see a strength from Israel that they've not encountered. What then will the nation say?
Well, no, absolutely. And while we've got the narrative and while Israel's got the international support of the community, it has to take out Hamas and destroy Hamas and its terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. So, you know, if we just reflect on what's actually happened. So, effectively now, the death toll is rising day by day. It's now believed to be over 1,000 Israeli civilians killed. 70% of those civilians are actually killed, Israeli soldiers killed, mothers and children killed. And also it's believed to be in the region of 100 to 150 hostages taken, including a Holocaust survivor, to Gaza, and with over coming up for almost 3,000 injured, and many of those critically injured, as we record this program today. And our hearts go out to Israel, our hearts go out to the Jewish people. You know, this is a time not to be silent, but to advocate the righteousness of Israel's cause and to defend the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. Should we have a look at the kind of timeline of events? Because like the Yom Kippur War, and literally this was a day after the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, Israel was hit by another surprise attack that it didn't expect. We can ask questions like why was and how did Hamas infiltrate what is considered to be the most sophisticated border in the world between Israel and Gaza and the Eretz crossing? Why was there only a skeleton number of IDF staff? Why did it take the IDF 6 hours to rescue those young people at the rave and come to these beleaguered Jewish communities? I mean, these are the questions that need answering, but I don't think they need answering now. What we have to do now is show support and love to Israel and the Jewish people in their hour of need. This is the greatest crisis that Israel has ever faced in their life. This is the greatest crisis we as Christian supporters of Israel face, because Israel is under attack and Israel is at war. Do you want to just relay the timeline of events that occurred on Saturday, the 7th of October, and that not only changed Israel, but changed the world?
Well, absolutely, Simon. I woke up very early on Saturday, and there was an uneasy lack of peace in my sleep. And I checked my phone. It was quite early. It would have been about 6:30 or so our time, but it was they're 2 hours ahead in Israel, and so 8:30 their time. And I saw the initial reports that there were rockets and missiles being fired from Gaza into Israeli southern towns, and that it was believed that the loss of life was greater than previous. And so at the time, that it was believed that there was about 60 who had died in those areas around like Ashdod and Ashkelon, some of the southern cities that are there. But then it emerged that there had been this party, this rave essentially for unity and peace, that essentially became the scene of a massacre. Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad claimed that they launched over 5,000 rockets into Israel to overrun Israel's Iron Dome missile protection batteries. Israeli authorities say it was half that number, but that was at that time. It's almost certainly over that by now, as they continue to fire thousands of rockets. Air raid sirens went off as far as Tel Aviv, Israel's largest city, 38 miles from Gaza, and additionally even further in Jerusalem. Rockets continued to be fired as Hamas terrorists penetrated Israel's heavy fortified border with Gaza. And initially there was a report, one of the first reports was of an Israeli woman killed by a missile strike in a direct hit. 7:30 a.m. Israeli time, reports of a security breach in the border fence. Some Hamas terrorists attempting to bypass the barrier completely, including by flying over on paragliders. There is some unverified footage, but I did see some footage, Simon, of some of these paragliders near the festival, the Unity Festival and concert that was going on. And you can think of just the truly frightening nature of seeing this play out in real time. There were others who sought to infiltrate by boat. It was at multiple points. The Israeli Defense Forces said they'd repelled two Hamas attempts to cross into Israel by landing vessels on the beach. The attack is part of several coordinated direct assaults on barrier crossing points using IED as well. By 5:50 local time, a Telegram account associated with Hamas's armed wing posted first images from the ground taken at Keren Shalom, the most southern of Gaza's crossings. They showed militants overrunning a checkpoint, the bloodied bodies of two Israeli soldiers on the ground. Another image showing at least 5 motorbikes, each carrying 2 terrorists armed with rifles, passing through a hole which had been cut in the wire fence section of the barrier. A less guarded section appears with a bulldozer seen demolishing a stretch of barbed wire-topped fencing. Dozens of seemingly unarmed people were gathered there, and some began to run through the gap. Eretz, the furthest north of the Gaza crossings, around 27 miles from Kerem Shalom, Hamas was swarming another crossing. Footage was posted on one of the group's propaganda channels showing an explosion at the concrete barrier, which served as a signal to start the assault. And a militant can then be seen waving a group of fighters through the blast site. 8 men in bulletproof vests and carrying rifles run towards a heavily fortified checkpoint and fire at Israeli troops. Gaza has 7 official crossings. 6 are controlled by Israel. There's 1 into Egypt, which is controlled by Cairo. But within the space of a few hours, Hamas had found ways to enter Israeli territory along the length of the barrier.
So let's have a look at this CBN News Report that was covering the events that occurred on Saturday, the 7th of October, which will be a day that will go down as a day of infamy.
Thanks for joining us for this live coverage of Israel at War. I'm Chris Mitchell. One day after one of the darkest days in Israel's history, when Hamas terrorists launched an invasion into Israel. It's left hundreds dead and more than 2,000 injured. Julie Stahl brings us the latest.
What happened today was never seen in Israel, and I won't let it happen again. The entire government is behind this decision. The IDF will immediately use all its strength to destroy the capabilities of Hamas. We will defeat them to death and take revenge for this black day they have inflicted on the state of Israel and its citizens.
A unique opportunity for the IDF to respond. So here's Julie Stahl with that latest story.
Eight locations, including 7 communities and a home front command base, were still under siege 24 hours after the massive terrorist attack from Gaza on the Jewish state. On Saturday, terrorists breached the border in 29 locations by land, air, and sea, according to military spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht. Israel is currently in control of all the border points, though Palestinian terrorists continue to try to break through. Israel has also carried out numerous airstrikes against Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip, including a compound belonging to the head of the intelligence department of Hamas, and the Navy targeted 5 terrorists who were hiding on the Zikim beach. Meanwhile, the IDF is evacuating Israeli citizens from southern communities and will warn Gazans that they should leave certain areas when Israel is ready to strike. Israel has cut off electricity that its power plant supplies to the Gaza Strip. One analyst asked, who would give electricity to an enemy as it's attacking you? Around 500 Israelis are now known to be dead and more than 2,000 wounded. So far, there's no official number of those who were kidnapped and taken back into the Gaza Strip. But according to Hecht, who called the attack unprecedented, they include children, grandmothers, soldiers, and bodies. And while Israel has been pummeled by thousands of rockets in the past, the big question on everyone's mind is how did hundreds of terrorists from Gaza breach the border by land, air, and sea, fight on the streets of Israel, and take hostages back across the border? No one can answer that now, as Israel fights to secure its land. Many officials are saying Israel must make an end to these attacks once and for all, and that it won't be a quick war. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
We're very grateful to our friends at CBN for their diligence and their effort in producing such a report very, very quickly with so much live footage there, and that carries over as well in some of the editing, so we apologize for some of the scattered nature of it. But also just to warn that there will be ongoing videos that we're seeing this evening. We've tried to spare you the worst of them, but there will be distressing images that you will be seeing. We go now to yet another with courtesy of the Israeli Foreign Ministry and also the IDF. Israel explained Israel under attack, and another report speaking of Hamas's declaration of war against Israel.
Heavily armed Hamas terrorists infiltrated into Israeli towns and cities, going door to door, slaughtering and kidnapping innocent Israelis. Dozens of Israeli civilians were murdered and injured, and many others were taken hostage. Additionally, the terrorists launched an extensive attack on Israel through widespread and indiscriminate firing of missiles and rockets at the citizens of Israel from the south to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Israel will take every measure necessary to protect its citizens against these barbaric attacks.
Hamas declared war against Israel. Armed Hamas terrorists infiltrated into Israel via a ground invasion and started going door to door slaughtering innocent Israelis. Hundreds of Israeli civilians, including children and women, have been killed or injured, and Israeli hostages have been taken. This is a war, and Israel will take every measure necessary to protect our citizens against these barbaric terrorists.
And our special guest joining us from Israel in Tel Aviv is Emily Shrer. She is a social media influencer and a very powerful voice of reason and truth for Israel during her hour of need. Emily, warm welcome to Behind the Headlines. And can I say thank you for what you are doing, standing up for Israel on social media right now. You gave a fabulous interview on I-24 last night, and you are so important for the millennial generation, particularly on social media, to communicate the truth of Israel's cause. Just share with us your thoughts of the most horrific terrorist event to have occurred in Israel's history that occurred on Saturday, the 7th of October. And the president of Israel described it as the worst massacre the Jewish people have faced since the Holocaust.
I mean, that's exactly right, how President Herzog described it. This really has been a national tragedy for all of the state of Israel, both at an individual level and a professional level, and even as someone who is a frequent commentator on issues of human rights globally, I'm absolutely horrified by the content that has been coming out. And I would be absolutely horrified if it was happening against any other group either. I mean, the depravity of the Hamas terrorists who who came and infiltrated Israel's southern border, who went into southern communities, slaughtering civilians, going house to house, raiding a music festival where there were thousands of people, by the way, many of them international, opening fire on civilians. It's depraved. It's horrific. I have never seen anything like it in my life, with the exception of ISIS, to be quite frank. And I think that this is obviously extremely traumatic for the entire state of Israel, especially given the fact that there are over 100 hostages being held in Gaza. But at the same time, I think the world is finally waking up to the way that Hamas actually operates. Hamas, of course, with the backing of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who reportedly, in the words of Hamas officials, helped actually orchestrate this attack. So Iran was involved in this entire initiative. So the fact that the world is seeing the true face of Hamas that we've been telling them for years, I mean, I'm relieved in a sense, but it shouldn't have to come to more Jews and Arabs who are Israeli citizens dying for the world to understand this. I mean, it's madness. At what point is the international community going to step up and be aggressive against terrorists, against evil, before something happens? It's like we haven't learned the lessons of history. And we saw it with Afghanistan not long ago. We're seeing it in Iran for 44 years. I mean, we were seeing it in Ukraine. It's terrible what's happening. And we need to learn, as a global society, we need to learn how to deal with evil before people are dying.
Thank you so much for those helpful words, Emily. It's been great to see words of support from Iraqis, Iranians. A whole stadium in Iran was chanting in support of Israel the other day. But what would you say to this kind of common "what about both sides" type argument that's reflected in this email? Israel treats the Palestinians very badly. This cannot be denied. Are you blind to this or think it's acceptable?
That's completely irrelevant to the attacks which occurred. I don't agree with that statement for a number of different reasons, but I'm not even going to get into all of those reasons because it doesn't relate to this issue. This was an organized, coordinated, premeditated massacre of civilians. And we know that that was the intent because this wasn't a strategic military campaign. They didn't cross the border in order to take land for Palestine or any of the things that we hear about that they claim they want in the Palestinian narrative. No. What they did was they came across the border and they started immediately murdering civilians, shooting people at bus stops, blocking off roads and dragging people out of their cars and shooting them, kidnapping and murdering old ladies, raping and murdering attendees at a music festival. That is not a military campaign. That is an attempted genocide. It's a pogrom. And it has nothing to do with what Israel has done or what the political situation is. It has nothing to do with that. Furthermore, Hamas is not the legitimate representative of the Palestinians. Technically speaking, the only person who can negotiate or make changes permanently for the Palestinian people is the Palestinian Authority. Hamas is a terrorist organization that has ruled the Gaza Strip with an iron fist since they took over. Ironically, they were democratically elected, and after winning the election, they threw their political opponents, Fatah, from one of the leading parties in the Palestinian Authority, off the roofs of buildings in Gaza. So this is the type of people that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, as I alluded to before, this is something we have been telling the international community, in particular Europe, which is providing a lot of funding to the Palestinians. And it's fallen on deaf ears. It's fallen on deaf ears. And unfortunately, this is one of the types of consequences we see when world leaders don't actually take a strong moral stance against terrorist organizations like Hamas.
Emily, we know that the Israeli public are reeling, we ourselves are reeling, and the Israeli public will demand of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and that of the IDF that they go in and totally wipe out and dismantle Hamas as a terrorist organization to end their tyrannical rule over Gaza. But we know that at the moment, Israel has international sympathy and support from the British government, from the US government, from European governments, but we know that it's only a question of time before the narrative changes. How imperative is it for the safety not only of Israel but also the free world that the IDF destroy Hamas and those terrorists responsible for the worst crimes committed against the Jewish people since the Holocaust?
Well, I think that this issue, especially as the region has developed with the sinister influence of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it's become more of a global issue than ever before. Israel has long said, and its officials, including Netanyahu, that Israel is sort of the front line against the types of extremism that we just witnessed in this attack. But it goes much further than that now, because we know that the Islamic Republic of Iran is actively plotting terror attacks on foreign soil. They've attempted kidnappings, they've carried out assassinations, including on European soil. They've attempted to do so in the United States as well. So this is a regime which is active in destabilizing the entire Middle East. And in addition to that, they have stated explicitly that their goal is to destabilize and ultimately destroy, in one capacity or another, both Europe and the United States, what they deem to be the West. There's a reason that they're chanting death to Israel, death to America all the time. They're not just talking. This is what they actually want to pursue. And I think that the fact that we see this Hamas being funded by the Islamic Republic of Iran and their training and support for operations such as this just shows that this is much more of a global issue than I think perhaps the international community realized. What's happening to Israel and in Israel could easily happen at a music festival or at a major event anywhere else in Europe. We already are at more casualties, for example, than the ISIS attack on Paris. So this is a really, really critical situation, not just for the state of Israel, of course, but for the global community, because Israel is the first front. And that's why we need the global community to stand with Israel as they take on Hamas. I do agree that Hamas should be dismantled. And I just want to say one thing that I think is really important, because I've seen that a lot of the international media and public figures have stated that Israel is responding in revenge for the attacks. Israel doesn't respond militarily in revenge. That is not the purpose. That is what Palestinian terrorists do. That is not what we do. What the IDF does is they seek to deter and remove the ability of Hamas terrorists to be able to carry out attacks. This is a self-defense measure. If Israel is striking, I think it's already over 900 airstrikes in Gaza, they're not striking to punish people, even Hamas terrorists. The purpose isn't punishment. The purpose is to stop this organization, this terrorist organization, from being able to continue their campaign of genocide and of murder and of kidnapping and of rape against Israeli civilians.
Our hearts and prayers are with the IDF and the soldiers who are so bravely putting themselves on the line, especially all of the reserves who've been called up in recent days. But there's another battle that's being waged on social media. Tell us about how people can become a part of supporting Israel on social media and the importance of the social media battle in this conflict.
Well, I don't think I can understate how important social media is when it comes to situations like this. It's made a huge difference with, for example, the protests in Iran against the regime. Social media has applied tremendous pressure both to Western governments against Iran and also against the government within Iran. And I think that it's important that we realize that social media can be used as a tool for good. In the past, it's been used as a tool for bad when it comes to the Israel situation. But now we have an opportunity to frame the narrative in a way that's actually correct, that reflects accurately for once what's going on. And I think that people need to be unapologetic about the fact that Israel has every right to defend itself, including when it's doing so right now. And we've already seen that Jewish communities have started to be attacked and blamed for the actions of Israel, which, by the way, in and of itself is anti-Semitic. You cannot hold Jews in London accountable for the actions of a foreign army. It's outrageous. And yet this doesn't seem to be common knowledge. So when we see these kind of incidents taking place, protesting for Palestine, in the immediate aftermath of a massacre like this, that needs to be called out. Not because there's anything wrong with saying Palestinians should have basic rights. Sure, that's fine. But doing so in the context of this pogrom which took place, where children and grandmothers are being kidnapped and dragged on motorcycles back to Gaza, it doesn't make sense. As I stated at the beginning, this campaign of violence has nothing to do with Palestinian rights. It has to do with a terrorist organization that's hijacked the Gaza Strips. And if someone cares about Palestinians, they should be condemning Hamas every bit as much, if not more, than what they don't like about what Israel is doing.
And Emily, just before we go, please share with us how our viewers can follow you on social media, because you are the voice of your generation in Israel, and you're doing a tremendous job, and you've done a tremendous job here today to really outlay Israel's moral stance that she's taking, which comes out of a necessity to actually defend her people and defend her borders.
So I'm on Twitter, Emily in Tel Aviv, and Instagram, Emily K. Schrader. You can feel free to follow me or ask questions or suggestions. I'm available pretty much all the time.
And Emily, we want to thank you so much for joining us on today's Behind Headlines. Please do send our love and our prayers with Israel and the Jewish people at this horrific time. And we are praying for the protection of the IDF as they have to go into Gaza. And we're just letting you know that we're standing with you in love and solidarity. We love Israel, we love the Jewish people, and we are going to continue to advocate Israel's narrative on the airwaves.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very grateful to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, to the IDF, and to Emily Shrer for that interview just now. Simon, the story is going to continue, I fear, for some weeks to come as we see the aftermath, the fallout. And what do you think is going to come next?
Well, I think we have to put this in perspective. As we mentioned in the beginning of the program, that this was the worst terrorist attack ever committed on Israeli territory. It was a pogrom, it was a massacre, and Hamas have been responsible for committing war crimes. So the fact that Hamas has penetrated Israel's borders means that Israel can't go back to the status quo. The status quo was, we are going to leave Hamas in power because we fear that if we remove Hamas, we could get a terror organization even worse than Hamas. So we'll just put up with a few rounds of rockets and missiles now and again to flare up, and we'll learn to live with Hamas. Effectively, that's been Israel's policy since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip since 2007 and started firing rockets and missiles into Israel. Despite Israel having a number of different wars that Israel sent the IDF in to dismantle and to destroy as much of the Hamas terrorist infrastructure they could, particularly in 2014. But this is different. This is different now. The Israeli public now are saying enough is enough. No more Hamas. No more kidnapping, killing, murdering and raping our people. No more bombing indiscriminately at our people. The Jewish people have suffered enough persecution in their life, and the one place that they are meant to feel home and safe is the nation of Israel. And if the nation of Israel can't protect her citizens, then what they have to do, and this is what the Israeli public will demand, is that they go in and destroy Hamas, they destroy all the terrorists, they destroy its infrastructure, and if need be, they go in and occupy Gaza once again in order to protect their citizens. Israel has to do that if she is to survive as a democratic, free, independent nation state. And the tragedy is the people of Gaza having Hamas as their government. I see slogans everywhere saying, free, free Gaza. I want Gaza to be free from Hamas, who are a totalitarian, demonic, evil regime that has now committed the worst crimes of genocide against the Jewish people since the Holocaust in the Second World War, and the world is waking up. So I think it will go there. The danger is, does this escalate now in the north with Hezbollah getting involved? We know that there, as of the recording of this program, 5 Palestinian terrorists infiltrated Israeli territory in the north, which involved a gunfight with the IDF. I think an Israeli soldier was killed in that. And also Israeli helicopter gunships enter into southern Lebanon to take out these terrorists. So Hezbollah will be watching very, very closely. But Israel, as a means of deterrent, has now to destroy Hamas. They don't have any other choice. And that's where I think this would lead next. I mean, what's also interesting is that we're seeing the US naval fleet, an aircraft carrier, sail into the Mediterranean. Some long-range American bombers have landed in Israel, so they could then target Iran. We don't know where this could go. This could escalate and lead into a regional war, but we know that Israel is in the fight of her life, just as she was in the Yom Kippur War. And as Christian supporters of Israel, we're in a fight. We're in a fight in this program today to tell the truth of Israel's cause, the truth of what's going on, so that people can make up their own mind and see what's happening and to pray in this situation, to come against the false media narratives and lies that are put out by so much of our mainstream media, even though they're very supportive at the moment, because they've seen the total shock and devastation caused by Hamas. I just want to go on, sorry.
Yeah, there's been a total change and shift in how the media has presented things, but it's difficult, Simon, because what's happened, yes, unprecedented in terms of its level, but this isn't a changing character from Hamas. This has been going on for years. This has been there's been a consistent display of a total lack of character, of immense evil, of a barbarity that it can scarcely be seen elsewhere, against elderly, women and children, the most vulnerable individuals. This isn't just about attacking soldiers. They're deliberately targeting civilians, wreaking havoc. I mean, even as we're recording this, my nieces and nephew and sister-in-law are in a bomb shelter. They're having to stay in a bomb shelter in the city in which they reside because of the horrors that Hamas is enacting. There's no both sides in this. People want to, in some cases, bring up various issues, as we've already asked Emily, in regard to the Palestinian situation as a whole, drawing some sort of false moral equivalence. There is no moral equivalence in what's going on here at all. Just consider what happened in one of the kibbutzes, Kibbutz Be'eri, near Ofakim. It was known mostly for its thriving print factory, manicured landscaping, and budding cultural scene. But following Saturday's surprise attack on Israel by hundreds of terrorists, now we know that it's 1,500 terrorists at least, who crossed in from the Gaza Strip, Be'eri has become a symbol of the tragedy that caused the deaths of hundreds of Israelis and drew a declaration by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Israel was at war with the Hamas terror group. Early on Saturday, these distressing images you can see, I warn you, there's more to come. Early on Saturday, dozens of terrorists entered the kibbutz, which was established in 1946 as part of a strategic plan to help the future state withstand an invasion from Egypt. Hamas troops then appeared to gradually gain control of the entire kibbutz, whose 1,200 residents make it the largest of the 25 villages that make up the Eshkol Regional Council. An as yet undisclosed number of kibbutz members were killed Several are believed to have been abducted and taken to the Gaza Strip. They walked around Be'eri like they owned the place. Haim Jalan, a survivor from the kibbutz and a former lawmaker and ex-head of the Eshkol Regional Council, told Army Radio on Sunday. They shot indiscriminately, abducted whoever they could, burned down people's homes so they'd have to escape through the window where the terrorist would wait, added Jalan, who he called what appeared in Be'eri a massacre. He said he had no precise tally of fatalities, survivors, abductees, or missing persons from Be'eri. It was part of an unprecedented raid by hundreds of armed Hamas troops who appeared to traverse the rest of the border area with ease, penetrating at least 3 cities, Ofakim, Sderot, and Netivot, and multiple villages. In Be'eri, the invasion featured an element that few Israelis could have imagined. A man wearing civilian clothes explained what was unfolding in Arabic to a cameraman as an embedded journalist would, as armed Hamas fighters were seen running down the concrete paths that are a feature in many of Israel's kibbutzim. It was an unprecedented image of victory by Hamas, whose terrorists were on a door-to-door roundup of kibbutz members, killing people and rounding up at least 50 others and holding them captive. About 17 hours after terrorists took control of the kibbutz, security forces finally said that they had freed all of the hostages, dozens of whom were kept in the dining hall, but were still sweeping the place for hostiles. The Israel Defense Forces killed dozens of terrorists on Israeli soil and hundreds more in strikes in Gaza, according to IDF spokesperson's unit.
Absolutely chilling, and we got another video now to show you that's even more chilling, and this is sadly an Israeli driver driving into the south of Israel. It's as you can see on the time, it's 7:39 on Saturday the 7th of October. Hardly anyone on the streets, quite eerie, and what you're going to see next is extremely distressing, but this is what the Israelis living in southern Israel had to experience over the weekend. And you can see there the driver probably thought that they were Israeli soldiers or Israeli police with an instant, and then we see them being shot at from their from the driver's side through the passenger's window. And there you can see how many Hamas terrorists there are literally on the roadside, with other cars being shot, other Israeli passengers being drivers being shot in cold blood, and that's a war crime. That's a massacre. And I want to read out a WhatsApp message I got from one of my very close Israeli friends over the weekend. And this came from her friend of one of the kibbutz that was attacked by Hamas on Saturday. Says, kibbutz near Oz, my kibbutz, the amazing one, has been demolished. You don't know, but my kibbutz has been demolished, burnt down and looted. They're not reporting anything. The terrorists arrived at 9 a.m. and they went from house to house. They kidnapped people to Gaza and set houses on fire. A few survivors gathered in one of the parks in the evening, and today they're being evacuated. It's incomprehensible. They kidnapped children, women, and the elderly who could barely walk, and no one knows anything. And this morning, 24 hours later, we still don't know anything about who was killed and who was kidnapped. We only know that the beautiful Nir Oz kibbutz, as we know it, is gone. Unfortunately, kibbutz Nir Oz is barely the only one. The scenario happened to nearby kibbutz, and that was from a friend of mine sent in the south in a WhatsApp message. You can see here's one of the kibbutz houses that has been set on fire with heavy machine gun fire. Even Israelis that ran into the bomb shelters. These Hamas terrorists actually set these bomb shelters on fire, and they died inside. I mean, the crimes against humanity committed by Hamas are absolutely horrific. Regan, you're married to an Israeli. You have 2 Jewish children. I've spent so much of my life in Israel, dedicating my life to defending Israel and the Jewish people. And this is not just covering a kind of story. This is extremely personal. When we know that the Israelis give nothing but incredible love and hospitality in the people that they are. And they are a beacon of light in a very, very dark region of the world. But sadly, Israel's beacon of light went out over the weekend, and Israel is absolutely reeling, and the Jewish people are reeling from what's happening. Do you want to read out one of the accounts of what happened at the music festival? Because this is young people. This is young people who were on an all-night rave in the desert, not far from the Gaza border, and it believed that Hamas actually knew that this was taking place and deliberately targeted them.
Outside of Kibbutz Reem in the desert, an all-night nature party, it was a festival for unity and peace, began Friday night, drawing about 3,000 mostly young Israelis. At least 260 people at the party were mowed down by Hamas gunmen in the early hours of Saturday morning after they had infiltrated from Gaza. You see scenes there on your screen. The chaos erupted at the Supernova Sukkot music festival, captured on cell phone footage by many individuals. Various attendees have been posting that, depicting terrified partygoers racing across vast open fields and taking cover in orchards as shots are heard in the background. According to an increasing number of military analysts, Hamas terrorists had apparently known in advance of the massive event taking place in an isolated area. They surrounded the participants and shot dozens before moving through the area to hunt others in hiding. They were slow to react. Like many partygoers in the rave, they had spent the night using drugs and alcohol. A video shows a friend checking whether Weinstein was good to drive. He had only drunk alcohol and partaken of the drug ecstasy 7 hours earlier, unlike his cousin who was tripping on acid. The confusion and panic, cars fleeing the scene, caused bottleneck traffic as security and police gave conflicting orders, said Weinstein. Several vehicles were abandoned while lined up before the exit, half blocked by police, said Weinstein, while some drivers waited their turn, unaware behind empty cars. Police blocked one of the roads left of the exit of the parking lot. Everyone was trying to get out. Some people started running out of their cars. This is, again, an eyewitness quote. "I think the drug use made it harder for people to think and react," doubtless. It all happened so fast, all within an hour from the first rocket to the first gunshots. Then we were all running for our lives after having such a good time, he said. Weinstein's videos show his vehicle driving off-road in a dusty field in an attempt to find another way out of the festival grounds. After Weinstein drove into the field, his cousin's girlfriend suggested they get out of the car and run. He stopped the car. They crouched in a field as they heard gunshots, but his cousin decided to go back for the car and get them out of the open. Weinstein credits him with saving their lives. Now navigating as his cousin drove, white-knuckled with a cigarette burnt down to the filter in his mouth, Weinstein said they attempted to convince some of those fleeing on foot to get in the car, but they just ran past. He captured a pickup truck filled with beyond capacity by partygoers who were clinging onto the roof. We saw people on bicycles getting away. You saw abandoned cars full of bullet holes. I remember one specific car, the person in the car was in the front seat with a hole in their face. They had tried to get away and they couldn't. They were shot in their car. He said that they only slowed to drive around corpses who were lying face down on the ground, scattered on the road. He said the dead included soldiers, describing passing IDF checkpoints as well as 2 men on the side of the road with black balaclavas and military gear with machine guns, possibly special forces, he said. Every time a car passed us, I was sure it was Hamas. Every time we saw what looked like soldiers up ahead, we didn't know if it was IDF or Hamas. We only slowed down for checkpoints and bodies, said Weinstein. They drove for 2.5 hours, mostly on side roads, and then got back to Tel Aviv and didn't know how to handle ourselves. Their friends were missing. It turned out several had hidden in the woods for 6 hours before the IDF eventually came to their rescue. Others were shot but survived. Weinstein said, "I know someone who was hiding in the ticket booth who was shot in the arm and leg, robbed, but let go," remarkably. He said, dozens of partygoers are still missing, likely either dead or taken hostage to the Gaza Strip. And of course, Hamas has said that as strikes from Israel increase in the Gaza area, they will be taking the lives of hostages. I don't understand how that can be allowed to happen, Weinstein asked, both the initial attack and how Hamas can tear down the wall with a bright yellow bulldozer. How could they allow the festival to take place so close to Gaza? How come it took the IDF over 6 hours to respond? I'm just full of rage.
That was an eyewitness account of attending that all-night rave or music festival that occurred on Friday, the 6th of October, into the early hours and in the morning of Saturday, the 7th of October. A day that we shall all remember and a day we shall never forget. And it's how Israel responds now as the world is watching, because Israel is on the front line of confronting terrorism. And as we record this program today, Israel as at war, and this is what Israel's IDF spokesman had to say.
This weekend, Hamas started a war against Israel with the worst massacre of innocent civilians in Israel's history. Hamas was more barbaric and more brutal than ISIS. Let me be crystal clear. Israel will respond with determination and force to their unprovoked war crimes. Hamas murdered hundreds of Israelis, men, women, and children, and took dozens hostage into Gaza. This horrific terror act demands a forceful, determined, and sustained response, which is exactly what we are doing and continue to do. Our Air Force is attacking hundreds of Hamas Islamic Jihad targets in Gaza. We follow international law while exercising our right and responsibility to protect our civilians. The days ahead will be long and difficult. We have paid a heavy price, but we will restore security to the people of Israel. Let me repeat, we will restore security to the people of Israel. Israeli intelligence indicates that Hamas are hiding among Gazan civilians inside Gazan homes and schools, hospitals and mosques. Hamas behaves like ISIS. I repeat, Hamas behaves like ISIS. It's the same strategy to maximize civilian casualties in Gaza and Israel and make you all forget the massacre of hundreds of Israelis that started this war in the first place. We will not forget. Hamas terrorists target Israeli civilians. Israel will target Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists wherever they will be in Gaza. We will do whatever it takes to protect our people and restore security to Israel. We are also looking to the north as well with full readiness, and we are fully coordinated with CENTCOM. General Halevi had just finished a conversation with General Kurila and will keep talking in the next hours again. Who attacks us in all over the Middle East will face a decisive attack back.
Well, we thank the IDF for the use of that video. There's much that we have to say, Simon. There's much that we don't have time to say, but it's important that we also recognize the ongoing spiritual battle that is going on, and that's something that we must not get distracted from by any means. There are numerous prayer points that we have that we need to draw to the attention of you, our viewers. If you desire to meaningfully pray for the situation as it's going on, could we suggest looking at the following? Several major barrages of rockets have been fired out of the Gaza Strip so far, and they continue. But we continue to pray that the Iron Dome would intercept those successfully, and continue to pray for the protection and guidance and wisdom of the IDF and those various forces there, that hostages would be released, that medical facilities would not be overwhelmed, and that the nations would continue to, as they have done, fully back Israel in this grave time.
Regan, thank you for doing the programme under really difficult and emotional circumstances, and I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. I know it can't be easy, but this is our moment. This is our moment to stand up, to be accountable before God and before the nation of Israel and the Jewish people in that hour of need. Israel's at war. They need our support. They need our prayers. They need our comfort. We need to comfort Israel and the Jewish people at this time. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.